I've been in jail 20 months, falsely arrested for a crime I did not commit.
Mr. Smither, I'm going to have you removed from the courtroom.
That's fine.
She was supposed to meet her best friend about halfway down the road. She never got there. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Mandy LeMaire. Viewer discretion is advised. Amanda Lynn LeMaire was born on July 19th, 1980, and she was born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska. But by the time this case happens, her and her family, they were living in this really tiny itty-bitty community called Taslina. At the time, it had a population of less than 300 people. This is an area where your neighbor is not exactly directly next door. It's, you might have to walk a ways to get to your neighbor. Everybody knew everyone, and it was just a tight community. Mandy's father, Dave, would say about his daughter, quote, "Mandy was the combination of a pretty little girl and an outdoor tomboy. She was my fishing buddy. She was my hunting buddy," end quote. Everyone said that she was just this really well-rounded, very good, well-behaved kid. She loved reading mystery books. She loved the Babysitter's Club series. Mandy was described by everyone as just being so incredibly mature, even at such a young age. She was incredibly responsible. Mandy also had two brothers, and she was very close with them. And both of her parents, her mom and her dad, were both in the picture still as well. On August 22nd, 1991, tragedy would befall this tiny community and Mandy's family. 11-year-old Mandy was going to be hanging out with her best friend, Erin. Her and Erin were really close. They'd been friends for a while, and the two of them hung out all the time. This is a photo of both of them together. So on this particular day, on August 22nd, 1991, Mandy and Erin planned to hang out, and they were going to essentially walk from each of their houses and meet halfway through. And Mandy was seen by her family leaving her home a little after 3 p.m. They would never see her again. Now, Erin, I guess, was a little late to leaving her house because she had fallen or gotten hurt somewhere and scraped a knee or something like that. And so she left several minutes after she had intended. So after all that, Erin begins walking down the road, expecting to find Mandy halfway through, waiting for her. She didn't find her there. And so Erin ends up walking all the way to Mandy's house. And then she goes to the home and knocks on the door and says, "Hey, is Mandy here?" Does she turn around and come back? They're like, "No, we thought she was going to be meeting you." Mandy was gone. Mandy was missing. Where is Mandy? The family then runs out of the house and they begin searching for her. And after a short time, they can't find her. They contact police to report her missing. A very large search begins for the 11-year-old girl. They have planes and helicopters in the air. They have a whole bunch of people searching on foot. They bring in scent dogs. During the search, it began to rain very heavily. It was like a downpour. And her dad was just extra worried now because if Mandy is out there, what if she's hurt somewhere and she's being rained on with this freezing cold temperatures and freezing cold rain, and maybe she can't move. And so, he had all these thoughts going through his head about his daughter possibly suffering out there. The search would go on for about 10 days or so. And on that 10th day, Dave was approached by a volunteer firefighter who said, "We found Mandy." And for a moment, he was happy. He was excited. "Oh my God, we found her. Great." Then the man says to him next, she's gone. She's been killed. The body of the 11-year-old girl was found in this really secluded, wooded area, very much off the path, off the road. This was roughly a mile or so from where Mandy lived. Mandy had been shot. That was her cause of death. But she had also been raped by her assailant. This 11-year-old child was raped. And with this being such a small community where everybody knows everyone, Mandy's parents, her siblings, her friends, everyone who knew her was terrified that they were going to just be interacting with her killer and not realize it. Have they spoken to the killer already? And, her dad became angry. That was sort of kind of what became his state of mind, was just constantly angry that someone would do this to his 11-year-old girl, let alone any little girl. And that, is this person still mingling amongst us? The nerve this man must have. Within a month or two of Mandy's body being found, they had a person of interest in mind, a man named Dave DeForest. Dave was a truck driver who lived in the area. So while Dave was initially considered a suspect, from what I understand, police were able to rule him out of being involved in what happened to Mandy. He had an alibi that they were able to confirm, it sounds like. But Mr. DeForest would become a help to the investigation anyway, because he tells a story about how he was driving down this road near the area where Mandy, they would all later find out, was. And he saw a person he knew, a man named Charles Smithart. Charles was another local in the area. Well, he saw Charles driving down the road from the area where Mandy's body was found, and he appeared to be like he was speeding, trying to get away. Charles didn't want to be seen by anyone. Charles Smithart, who was 61 years old at the time, he lived in this, this big barn or shed or something behind his mom's property. It was this really disheveled, kind of very cluttered mess of a place that he slept in. Charles was actually married and he had kids, but the family was living in California at the time. I'm not sure if maybe they were doing some sort of separation. I don't know for sure. Because at this point, he's in Taslina, Alaska. So the police asked him for we need your alibi. Where were you during this particular time? They had the time frame of when this would have happened. And he says that he was with his mom. They were both at the property they lived on. And, that's it. They were all afternoon. And his mom would confirm that. She would say, yeah, he was here with me. Now, keep in mind, Mandy would have been abducted probably a few minutes after 3 p.m., and Aaron didn't get to the halfway point until about 3:30-ish or so. And so when the mom of Charles confirmed his alibi, they wanted to make sure. And so because this is such a small community, there were people who would come out and say, well, actually, I saw Charles' mom at the grocery store. So police go to the grocery store and they're able to get receipts from the purchases she made there. And there were witnesses who said, yeah, it was her who was in the store with us. And they actually had her receipt. And that receipt was time-stamped for about, I think it was 3:17 p.m. or so. And then she wouldn't have been able to get back home until about close to 3:30. So if she was with her son Charles, what she said she was, what is this about? You've lied. You've lied about his alibi. And so now that his alibi is crushed, and the fact that they had to lie about it definitely points towards guilt. Police were able to get a warrant to search Charles' property and his car. And at the same time, they're also talking to witnesses, family, friends, acquaintances of Charles. And I guess there was one of Charles' cousins would come forward that she also saw Charles' pickup truck on that same road around the same time, with Charles behind the wheel. They also talked to Charles' kids, his 2 kids. They found out that Charles had sexually abused them as well growing up. Charles also had a 3rd child, another girl, and one of her sisters who had been sexually abused by him said this about the 3rd sister, quote, she had made herself deliberately fat and deliberately ugly during her adolescence so that her father would not find her attractive, end quote. So she made herself look less appealing to him so that her own father wouldn't rape her. Wow, what a guy. Okay, so was there any physical evidence? Well, yes, there was. So in Charles's car, they found blonde hair strands, which definitely did not obviously match him or his mother. The 2 hairs would be very similar in color, shape, size, and all that to Mandy's hair. They found fibers on Mandy's body that matched exact fibers found in his truck, which they also would link back to fibers matching an article of clothing he was wearing that day. They found little yellowish or orange paint chips on her, which would later match paint samples found on Charles's property. They also had these little tiny sparkly specks that were actually seen on Charles's clothing when he was being spoken to by police initially. And those little sparkles, and when they took some of those samples, they also found those same type of sparkly things on Mandy. Charles, they found out, he did a lot of welding. He worked with a lot of metals. In that little place he lived in behind his mom's house, he had his own little metal shop. And so when they took samples directly from the metal shop and compared it to the samples found on Charles's clothes, and then to the samples found with Mandy, it was a match. Can they say with 100% certainty that these are the identical things back then? No, they really couldn't. But they were microscopically basically twins. They were the same thing. So they had some forensic evidence, but most of it, the evidence they had was essentially circumstantial. But Charles would be arrested and charged with Mandy's murder. At the trial, they brought forth the forensic experts who testified with regards to the yellow paint chips they found with Mandy and also found on Charles's property. Those little metal sparkle parts that they found on Mandy, Charles, and on his property were a visual match. The two hairs they found. Now, there was no DNA in this case in terms of when he had sexually assaulted her, did he leave any DNA? It doesn't sound like there was any. At the trial, Charles's defense attorney would state that he had an alibi. His mom alibied him. Well, then the prosecution would basically provide evidence that she was lying. She was here at a grocery store when this all happened. She wasn't with her son. That's just, it's foolproof. That's evidence that she was lying. They also found a .22 caliber weapon at Charles's home, which was actually owned by his mom. Mandy had been shot with a .22 caliber. Now, at the trial, which happened in 1993, for whatever reason, Charles's defense attorney was not allowed to argue that somebody else had potentially committed this murder. In particular, Mr. DeForest, who was the whole catalyst for this thing, because he was the one who started with I saw Charles driving down the road in his pickup truck, and that's how it all started. But Mr. DeForest also was a suspect before Charles. From what I understand, they were able to clear him. They didn't find any similar metals or paint chips or anything like that on Mr. DeForest or in his car or his property or anything. I don't know how thoroughly they searched, so I'm not sure. But they did clear him. So the jury comes back and they find Charles guilty of Mandy's murder. He is sentenced to 114 years in prison. He'll never get parole. But in 1999, the Alaskan Supreme Court had completely overturned his conviction because the defense attorney was told by the judge that they were not allowed to argue that somebody else could have committed the crime, which, to be fair, you should always be allowed that. If a person's on trial for murder and you can't say, well, it wasn't me, but I think it might have been this person, you should be at least allowed to say it, but they weren't allowed to do anything with it. So, that's annoying. Even though Charles was probably the guy, this was annoying because they could have just let that evidence come in at the first trial. So what would happen at that point is that while he would be awaiting a second trial, he was still being held in prison. And, the whole Supreme Court thing happened in 1999. Within a year, by 2000, Charles Smithhart, in his 70s now, died of lung cancer in prison in 2000. A second trial would never come. Now, because of the law in Alaska, if a person dies while awaiting a second trial, or whatever the case may be, or awaiting a trial at all, if they die, those charges are now dismissed. So the charges were dropped after he died because they have to do that. A lot of people will look at that and go, oh, so they don't think they could have prosecuted him a second time then. That's not it at all. They just didn't have a defendant anymore. There was no one to prosecute. So, they're gone. And so while Charles was found guilty, sentenced to 114 years in prison, the family got justice for a brief amount of time, but then that conviction was overturned. So technically, there is no conviction on record for Mandy's murder. And, with him being dead, it's kind of like, well, that's sort of poetic justice, if you will. It does sound like pretty much everyone believes that it was Charles. Everyone knew it was him. There was a point, though, at his trial initially where he had a major outburst. He always denied having anything to do with it. And so I want to show you this real quick. I played it towards at the beginning of the video, but I want to show you his outburst he had in court.
Mr. Smithhart, you're going to have to be quiet at this point. We have to
Put me in
pull the
jail?
third.
You gonna throw me in jail? I've been in jail 20 months, falsely arrested for a crime I did not commit.
Mr. Smithhart, I'm going to have you removed from the courtroom.
That's fine.
I don't want to do that.
Throw me in jail. I've been in there for 20 months, falsely arrested for a crime I did not commit.
And a lot of people look at that and they kind of go, you know what, that sort of does look very sincere. That actually does look like he's being kind of truthful. Pretty much any guilty person, for the most part, will go to their trial and stand in front of a judge or a jury and say, I did not do this. But sometimes it feels disingenuous. It doesn't seem like that person is being authentic. This outburst, it just had a lot of what, was he guilty? But at the same time, you could easily do that to try to fool people. Personally, I look at it and go, you know, did they have the physical evidence to convict him? I think they did. They had all those little tiny specks. Those little things, these tiny little things here are still things, and they're still evidence. And so, like, these specks of paint and specks of metal chippings and stuff, like, it's still legitimate. It still proves that she was with him in his car and or at his property at some point. So it definitely sounds like they got the right guy. And so Mandy, this 11-year-old kid, just wanted to go outside and play with her friend. That's it. She wanted to have fun with her best friend that day. And, you know, I saw an interview on Forensic Files where the friend, Aaron, you know, as an adult, said, if I hadn't have, like, fallen that day and hurt myself, if I hadn't left my house about 5 or 6 minutes after I was supposed to, would I have met up with Mandy? Would this have ever happened? Would she have been kidnapped? Would she have been murdered? Would she have been sexually assaulted by this man? And I feel so bad for, like, her for thinking that way. Because the odds are, if they were walking together, he probably would have taken them both. I mean, let's just be real. If he could have, he probably would have. But, you know, she always has that, like, but what if, you know? And I understand that, but I hope she still doesn't feel that way. This was not her fault. This was not her responsibility. She couldn't have possibly known. No one could have possibly known. So, yeah, I just hope that she's not still, like, reeling about it. And even, like, after the fact, there would be other people who came forward later on that would say, like, you know, we were walking down the road one time, me and my friend, and this guy who looked like this Charles person in this truck that it looked like he drove, he approached us and tried to get us into his car. Well, we said no, and so we sped away. One girl said that someone who looked like Charles, driving the same truck that looked like Charles' truck, stopped and said, you know, hey, do you want to ride? And then another car pulled up, and so Charles just sped away really fast. So it sounded like he had attempted this many times, and possibly, maybe he already did successfully before Mandy. Mandy doesn't get to grow up. She doesn't get to graduate high school. You know, like I always say in these videos, the things that you don't get to do. You know, her parents did not get to see their little girl grow up to be this really great young adult and go to college and get the degree she wanted and get the job she wanted to do and have her own family. And none of that gets to happen. None of it. And why? Because this fucking old piece of shit man decided he wanted to take her instead. But, you know, the best way to look at this is that even though technically legal justice was thrown out, he died in prison, never a free man. And so, in a way, Mandy still got the justice she very rightfully deserved. That is it for this case, True Crime, a Rooney, Dooney, Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, if you're new here, hello, my name is Mike. I tell multiple true crime stories here a week, so please subscribe, hit the like button, leave a comment so more people can see the video. Share the video if you like to. Also, you're notified of when I post new videos. Please watch the videos all the way through. It definitely helps a lot. I appreciate you all. I also tell short form true crime story. I'm sorry, my throat is still very scratchy, so if it sounds like I'm kind of like rushing through this video, I apologize. I'm just trying to get through before like my my throat just falls out of my head. If I have a TikTok page where I also tell short form true crime stories. So feel free to follow those. You can find the link in my link tree in the description of this video below. If there's a case you want me to cover, well, first of all, I have my case list, which is over 7,000 names. It's in that same link tree. You can scroll through it. It's pretty much alphabetical. I don't see a case on there that you want me to cover. Just send me a really quick email. My email is also listed below. Just the name of the case, where it happened, and when it happened, and I'll add that to my list. I pick my cases at random normally. However, if you are a loved one who has a cold case or a murder or a missing person, let me know that you are a loved one to that individual, and I can make sure that case gets a higher priority. Yeah, anyway, that is it for this video, everyone. True Crime Maroonies. So until the next case, ta-ta for now.